Hello, Brandon Fertig here with Minnesota Blockchain Initiative. This is the MN Blockchain Conversations podcast. But again, we're not in the Quantum Lex studio in Minneapolis, but on the road at Infinita City's Crypto Summit at Prospera, Honduras. There, I sat down with a couple of the event's presenters, author Max Borders and blockchain founder David Johnston. In today's podcast, David Johnston, author of The Concept of Decentralized Applications, discusses his 13 years in the space, working early on with Bitcoin, Ethereum, and now AI agents with his startup Morpheus. David also shares his thoughts on the future of the industry. Enjoy. Thanks so much for taking the time here in the middle of day 2 at Crypto Cities Summit.
Hey everybody, David Johnston. Been in crypto since 2012, sort of always was an economics nerd and got into Bitcoin pretty early, but that sort of led me further down the rabbit hole on decentralized assets. Most people know me for writing the paper on decentralized applications back in 2013, and that sort of gave me a position where I got to really contribute to each layer of the tech stack as it went from decentralized money to smart contracts, and now I work a lot on smart agents. So, the more I contributed to the different protocols, sort of the more we expanded the ability to go from transmitting money to having real finance on chain, and now we have smart agents and all the technology has really evolved. So it's been a fun journey.
We'll certainly get to the smart agents because I'm guessing, as was the case for me just several hours ago, I hadn't heard the term before, and I'm in the space, so or if I have, it hasn't stuck. So I want to definitely talk a lot about that, especially since that's what you're working on now. But I also don't want to gloss over your background because it's I think it's easy to kind of take for granted all the dynamics that are in play right now in the crypto space, whether it's memes or NFTs or gaming or smart contracts or DeFi, or there's just so much. But when you started, there weren't many Dapps, which led to DeFi. I'm guessing some kind of order like that.
Sure.
And so what was the community like back then? Like when you say I got into crypto in 2012, is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What does that even mean? Was there even a conference to attend?
It was largely online. And I heard about it, Bitcoin about it, from a friend when I was going to a meetup. And he said, "Hey, did you hear Bitcoin hit top $10?"
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "What's Bitcoin?"
Mm-hmm.
Once he finished explaining it, I was, wait a minute. There's a non-governmental money that will never be inflated by politicians and is controlled by math. Yeah, I'd like to turn my green pieces of paper into that, right? And that sort of set me off on that journey. But
were you immediately sold like that?
Well, I had already seen virtual currency because I had participated in Second Life back in 2006, 2007. They had the Linden dollar.
Yeah, I remember that.
Virtual currencies.
Yeah.
It was centralized and controlled by Linden Labs, the company that made Second Life, but it sort of proved the use cases. If you remember Second Life, people built stock markets and casinos, and they were doing money transmissions and remittances and all these international interesting use cases, until they were shut down by the regulators. In January of 2007, regulators came into the office of Linden Labs and said, "Do you have any idea what people are doing in world?" And explained that you need licenses for money transmission and bank charters.
Even though it was just credits?
Didn't matter.
Because that's what those Linden dollars were.
Sure.
I mean, they were really worth something because you could exchange them for dollars. There was a market.
Yeah, tell that to the regulator. Seemed unconvinced. It basically told Linden Labs to shut down all of the interesting use cases in Second Life. And that was basically the end. They were on a meteoric rise. I don't know if you remember, they had 5 million users and all these people were selling digital real estate and creating digital property and launching companies in world. All that came to a screeching halt, right? And so having had that experience.
Because they broached the money.
Yeah, because it was custodial. Linden Labs was a custodian of all of those credits. They held all the monetary units. So people were doing all of this money transmission, they needed to do KYC and AML and 50 other things and have a money transmission license and all this stuff that we learned later in crypto, right? The early days of Coinbase, they went state by state and got a money transmitter license, which is a state issued license to be able to, in their case, sell Bitcoin and take dollars.
Right.
They didn't start as an exchange. They started basically as a vending machine for Bitcoin. But that took them millions of dollars and years of work to accomplish in the case of Coinbase in 2012, 2013. Linden Labs, they were set up to build Second Life. They weren't set up to become a financial services company, right? And so when I saw Bitcoin in 2012, it was like, oh, it's an unstoppable Linden dollar. There's no CEO, there's no office to go knock on the door in California. This thing is open source. Satoshi's gone. It's fully decentralized.
Yeah.
This thing, I know exactly what people are going to do with it. They're going to create casinos and stock markets and do money transmission and all of the things we did with the Linden dollar 6 years previous, but this time in a fully decentralized context. So for me, that was very inspiring, having already had that experience.
I'm surprised I hadn't heard that comparison before.
Yeah.
But I've heard it to compare to the Liberty dollar.
Sure.
I've heard it compared to, there's some other virtual money.
eCash, eGold, every predecessor to Bitcoin was shut down. The other person that always talks about Linden Labs is Bill Tai. So I see him every year at a conference. Reminisce about the old Second Life days. And he was one of those other guys. He was actually helping with, I believe, with Linden Labs and was involved in helping create some of that. So he had a front row seat, right, for what happened there as well. And so a lot of those early digital pioneer guys that were there for the early days of the internet, those first online massive multiplayer kind of games, sort of had the experience of, I'm very sure people are going to use this. Because I've already seen what they use it for.
There have been books written on just the idea of timing and like an idea whose time has come.
Sure.
And if you have the idea before the time has come, too bad.
Sure.
And if you're late, too bad. Early or late.
Well, I mean, I think back to the early libertarians, 70s, 80s, 90s. It was mostly theory.
Yeah.
Right? You wrote books and you tried to educate people and this and that. But it wasn't until the internet for communications and then finally crypto for value that you could really instantiate those ideas in the real world. And it turned out those ideas worked. Like, people liked honest, transparent, open source systems that were far superior to the, shadowy currency systems of whatever they're country.
And alternative places to call home, like where we're at today.
Yeah. But yeah, to answer your question, the early Bitcoin community lived online.
Yeah.
It was on Bitcoin Talk. It was on our Bitcoin, the Bitcoin subreddit. That's where everybody got together, and they held one of the first Bitcoin conferences was by the Bitcoin Foundation in May of 2013. They had it in San Jose, California. And that's the first time everybody got together in real life. At least at scale. Yeah, I spoke.
You spoke?
Yeah, talking about building companies in the Bitcoin ecosystem. That's where I ended up starting BitAngels back in 2013. And basically pulled together the first angel group to people to invest in Bitcoin startups.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
So what were you doing before?
Building tech companies since I was a teenager.
Okay.
Back in the early internet days when online publishing was cutting edge, to date myself, right? So I'm telling you, books on the internet, it's going to be a thing. You're just going to...
So when
they used to blow people's minds. They're like, no, you just go to a library. It's like, I think all media is going to move online, but this was the late 90s, early 2000s, right? So
it's fascinating how off people are in their prediction, and that is not at all an insult because there's no way to know how we will consume and behave online. Like, they thought online shopping wouldn't work, and for a while I didn't buy any clothes online because I like to try mine on. I want to touch them, obviously.
But it's interesting, once you've gone into the weeds and you understand the building blocks, why did people finally trust shopping online? It was largely thanks to PayPal. They acted as an insurer of the commerce. You knew if you paid with PayPal, if you didn't get the thing, they would pay you back, right? And the merchants knew they would actually get the money and it would be processed. And people imagine in retrospect that was easy to build. Do you know PayPal was sued by 48 out of 50 states attorney generals? They didn't, the state did not like the idea that there's this digital money moving around. They really had to fight to, sort of establish that infrastructure, eventually sold famously to eBay, right? That's where Elon and Peter Thiel and everybody got their first big exit from the internet days. So, what you have to understand is their time has come, usually has to do with, does the infrastructure for it to exist, is it in place? Like take YouTube. Hundreds of companies tried to build online video streaming before YouTube's success. But 2005 was this magic moment where the broadband speeds were just fast enough. Remember the early limit, you could only do like a 5-minute video on YouTube. Like that's about all it could handle. And it was like low quality video, but it was just good enough. People started passing around funny clips and comedy and jokes. And
I remember Ebaum's World.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff, right? Was the early YouTube community. So, but the sort of, like you said, the time had come. What the time had come means is the internet got just fast enough.
I wonder if founders know that. Like, yes, I, coded all night for 6 months and I built this thing, but it's also I'm also very fortunate to have, struck while the iron was hot. And, that poor schmuck, the iron just wasn't hot yet.
Sure. Though in crypto, what you're really talking about is adoption rates and network effects. And it was hard to be too early in Bitcoin. The downsides of too early in Bitcoin were like, there was no multi-sig, the wallets were really janky, they were hard to use, but you were effectively getting paid this huge premium to go through the friction of downloading a full node.
Sure.
Right? I don't know if you remember those days, but like it would take 24 hours on a slow connection to download the entire Bitcoin.
I'm pretty early to Bitcoin, but so was Coinbase.
Sure.
So I got my first Bitcoin in 2013 on Coinbase.
There you go.
So I didn't run into that.
It was a good place to start.
Yeah.
I started with Mt. Gox and BitInstant, and unfortunately,
you were that early and got it all in. Then you got Mt. Gox.
Well, fortunately, I was technical enough to be running my own full node.
Yeah.
So I would always transfer the coins to my own wallet. Right. That's something people preached online. Is you really, if you're in crypto, you be self-custody. Right. You're not your keys, not your coins, and even in those early days. If you listen to sort of the advice, that was good advice, because every single exchange that I used back in 2012 no longer exists. And so self-custody proved the best.
Right.
Best out.
Right.
But it wasn't easy. Yeah.
Now that idea too, and I we have certain frames of reference in how we understand the world, and I always compare the internet today to the printing press in New York in the 1500s. And like Martin Luther wasn't the first reformer of the Catholic Church. There had long been rebels speaking out for changing how things were, and they were either ignored or they were burned to death or something like that, or kicked out or something. But he happened to do it when there was the printing press. And so when he printed the material in the Gutenberg Bible, and then it stuck. So it's just that same issue of timing, and then a revolution. And I think that we're in one of those now with the internet.
Yeah, of course.
Anyway, so I don't know. So you said you wrote the Dapps paper in 2013, and you found Bitcoin in 2012. I mean, that's not a very long time. So like, you just as soon as you learned about Bitcoin, it didn't take you very long to put 2 and 2 together, or 2 and 2 and 2 and 2 and 2 together, and say, hey, we can do Dapps.
Well, I thought of Dapps as an extension of the Bitcoin philosophy. Because if you really look at what made Bitcoin successful, I proposed in my paper was effectively 4 things. Right? The project had to be open source. That's how you don't suffer the Linden Lab outcome. Right? It had to be peer-to-peer, so there's no central point of failure. Right? It had to have a blockchain, so there was a persistent record of everything that happened, and it had to have its own token. That was the brilliance of Satoshi, is he created a system where the software could pay for its own hardware. Those block rewards that go to miners created this decentralized incentive for anybody in the world to help the network continue existing.
What has to have its own token?
Every DApp, every project, every blockchain.
Every project built on Bitcoin?
On any chain. If you don't have a token, you have no way to pay for persistence. So this was the fate of Hyperledger. I don't know if you remember that initiative by IBM and a bunch of big corporates. they decided in 2014, 2015, we're going to do blockchain.
Okay.
We don't need those pesky tokens because we don't
Yeah.
know how they're going to treat them legally or regulatory. So we're going to build blockchains, private blockchains, and we're just going to host the servers. And that's what happens every time. If it's a guy with a checkbook paying for a server, as soon as the project's done, the servers go offline, the blockchain disappears. It doesn't have persistence. If I build something on Bitcoin or on Ethereum, it's going to be there for 10 years. It's going to be there for 20 years. I know that I have that infrastructure to come back to. So everybody ended up building, not surprisingly, on the public blockchains, on the ones that had their own token, and they were doing proof of stake or proof of work, but they had some way to reward people to continue hosting the nodes, the validators, getting the consensus.
Right. I guess my distinction there is, does every dApp need its own unique token, or can it use the token of the native chain?
Depends on the dApp.
Okay.
And it depends if you need persistence. So today you're in a more advantageous position where you can pay for consensus and persistent via gas fees. So I don't have to build an L1 anymore. I can just launch a smart contract on Ethereum. And if I pay for the gas fees, Ethereum worries about consensus and ordering and maintaining the nodes and the validators.
Right.
I'm just paying a fee in order to access all of that infrastructure. But the challenge remains the same. So you have a smart contract now, and you can access all this beautiful Web3 infrastructure via gas fees. But why should anybody contribute value to your project? If you don't have an incentive mechanism, let me tell you, nobody cares. And you don't get adoption, and you don't solve the cold start problem and bootstrap. So many things have launched, but everybody ends up with a token. Uniswap ended up with a token. Now,
even though they charge fees, they still needed a token?
Yeah. You'd also need it for decentralization of the governance. They introduced a DAO. Is one company control this infrastructure forever? Or are the community going to own this infrastructure? How else do you hand it over to the community?
Well, how would Dapps ever develop on Bitcoin where they believe there should only be Bitcoin?
Well, they didn't.
Is that
all
why?
Those people went over to Ethereum. I was there in January of 2014. Vitalik gave the first talk about Ethereum at the Miami Bitcoin conference.
How'd that go over?
Amazing.
Okay.
Like 500 engineers followed him out the door when he left. I mean, you can still look up the videos of YouTube of him being mobbed in the hallway after his talk, right? And I had never seen a reaction like that. But people could tell even online. Vitalik added me and a bunch of others to a Skype group to talk about the white paper, and that blew up to like 200 people in the Skype group. This is pre-Discord, pre-Slack, all those applications were back on Skype in 2013, right? And the excitement and the pent-up energy of people wanting to build on blockchain, but Bitcoin developers had decided to take a very conservative approach. And say, we're not going to do generalized scripting. That was what Vitalik's original proposal was, to do generalized scripting on top of Bitcoin. And they're like, yeah, that's just not something we're going to support. We think it opens too many attack vectors. It's this big can of worms that we don't want to deal with. Bitcoin is succeeding. It's working. Let's just get digital gold. Like that in and of itself is a huge win, right? And so I respect that opinion. I don't agree with it. But I understand why they made those decisions. So he decided to create a separate project, ultimately a separate blockchain.
And did he announce that at Bitcoin in 2014?
Yeah. I mean, the white paper had been circulated online, but that's the first sort of big presentation he gave was January 14.
And how did Ethereum differ from your idea of Dapps?
So Ethereum, if you look at the white paper, build it itself as a platform for smart contracts and decentralized applications.
Okay.
So they were instantiating that idea of, hey, people want to adopt this Bitcoin-esque kind of approach. You need generalized scripting, right? So you ended up with the EVMs.
And he didn't just fork Bitcoin and do that. He's like, let's create something completely new.
Well, because they have a fundamentally different philosophy.
Okay.
So in even those early days, they knew they wanted to proof of stake because it's very difficult to compete with an existing network like Bitcoin for proof of work, right? And if you've looked across all the proof of work coins, they basically specialize into one algorithm, and you end up with one winner in that algorithm, because anybody else can sort of be 51% attacked.
Yeah.
If you share an algorithm with a larger network, it opens all these attack vectors. So they said, hey, we're going to do proof of stake. They had the humility, they being the Ethereum folks, to say they weren't ready to do that day one. So we're going to start with proof of work for GPUs. It's going to be a different algorithm than Bitcoin, and we're going to try to make it more decentralized. We're going to try to avoid the ASIC outcome, and anybody can run it on their GPU, right? But they built in from the very early days of Ethereum. Do you remember the difficulty bomb?
I know the term, but I don't know really what it is.
It was almost like a dead man switch. And so they wanted to build in a way that the miners wouldn't take over Ethereum and prevent them from moving to their vision of proof of stake. So they built into the code this difficulty bomb that would make the mining impossibly difficult unless they updated the software. And so they kept updating the software because it took a long time to figure out all the edge cases for proof of stake. So we're talking 2014 to 2021, 2022, whenever it officially switched over. Like that's 7-8 years. They just kept updating the code and pushing the difficulty bomb further into the future. But miners knew in Ethereum they were going to have to do something else with their GPU eventually, because it was going to move to proof of stake. But most of the miners had earned a bunch of Ethereum and holding Ethereum, and now they became validators and they're participating in proof of stake. But it was a good bootstrapping mechanism.
Yeah.
Others tried to go straight into proof of stake, and most of them fell on their face because there weren't good wallets and wallet infrastructure yet. And so where were most people holding their coins? They're holding them on custodial exchanges. So as soon as somebody turned on a proof of work system, the exchanges realized nobody's voting with these things. We hold all the votes. We're going to elect all the validators. And so 2014, 2017, all the proof of stake stuff was very much dominated by a few exchanges that were holding all the votes. And so that wasn't accomplishing this goal of decentralization. So you needed all the infrastructure to mature before you could really pull off.
They were allowed to leverage their own tokens. They were
allowed. Like, people didn't even understand how these systems worked. They hadn't understood there was a governance mechanism or a validator mechanism. They were just.
But they took other people's crypto that they were trusting them with.
Yeah. And
then they used them to stake.
Well,
I know Coinbase does that, but it's an option. You can choose.
Sure. I mean, we're talking like early days, 2014, 2015, like people didn't know how these systems worked. We're talking about, fly-by-night international exchanges. They got listed there, and all of a sudden all the validators are elected by one exchange. It wasn't very decentralized. So Ethereum was very cautious and slow about switching to proof of stake, and they got a lot of criticism for that, but it was probably the right technical call until they had great software in a very diverse community and many people holding the tokens in their own wallets and not relying as much on exchanges like people used to for custody.
What's the general, maybe you already said it and I didn't quite get it, but what's the general argument for proof of stake over proof of work?
So you can make different arguments. One argument is more decentralized, is proof of stake. Like, what is the barrier to participation in mining?
Well, now it's significant.
It's very significant. And really, it's been significant for a while. GPUs were 2012, 2013. The ASICs started coming out late 13, early 14. Now we're talking, you have a data center, you have $100 million, you have low cost energy, and you're sitting in Texas or some other friendly jurisdiction. Like, those are the only miners. Like, there's only 3 or 4 pools, and there's only 5 or 6 major mining groups. A lot of them are public companies now. They all implement OFAC. They've bended the knee to the state. And so you could argue Bitcoin was well distributed in the early years because of CPUs and then GPUs became more concentrated. There are $100 billion of staked Ethereum across 1 million validators across many people. So if your goal is to distribute the units into the system in the most egalitarian way, proof of stake can be attractive. But there are counter arguments that proof of work is more fair. You're rewarding effort, not holding capital, right? And I think people conflate those a little bit. When mining becomes highly concentrated, it basically becomes capital. Like call it work, but it's a public company raised $1 billion.
Yeah.
And it's mostly proof of work is now mostly approximate capital. But so you can also say attack vector wise, Ethereum has a very low attack surface. Like the nodes can be anywhere. How do you even know somebody's running a validator? It doesn't have a big energy footprint to say, oh, the miners are over there. And that's happened in a lot of countries. You were running miners in China.
Right.
Government didn't like it. You got kicked out.
Right.
You got turned off. That happened in a bunch of Central Asian places. They're like, oh, thank you for building this data center. Now it's our data center. Right? And all of a sudden, all your capital and everything goes away. A validator is just a computer. It's just a server. It's a full copy of the node, right? It's hard to detect. How would you know? There's no big obvious footprint for somebody to know. So I think the best outcome is we've ended up with both, which is you have proof of work, which has certain attack vectors, you have proof of stake, which has certain attack vectors, but you want both of them to exist in case either one gets pressure and attack, right? They make each other stronger in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how either side has that same criticism of the other.
Sure.
Where it's
different
like
philosophies.
Yeah, like for a while there was it Lido was a third.
Lido, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. And you can say the same with the pools.
Yeah, right. I just think that's just part of like
economies of scale.
It's almost physics. It's like that's just what happens. You see those charts, they talk about, all the food is owned by 7 companies. All the brands of food are owned by 7 companies.
Sure.
All the media is owned by 6 companies. It's like, that just, and so when Bitcoin mining went to like 4 or 5, I'm like, yeah, that's just what seems to be what happens in the world.
Sure. Well, and in Bitcoin, it's restricted by the economics of the system. If you were to produce more than 23% of the hash rate, you effectively start competing with yourself. Because you're increasing the difficulty of your own discovery enough over a certain point, which is why you always end up with about 5 big miners and pools, because they're all optimizing towards that like 23%. And if they go above that, they're losing more money than they're making, in the sense that they're increasing the difficulty rate, which is very unique to Bitcoin.
Yeah, was that just kind of a happy accident?
Yeah,
because it seems hard for me to believe Satoshi could have foreseen that.
Yeah.
Because how could you see so far ahead to know that?
I mean, and they had a lot of those debates even in the early days, like what is this going to look like when it gets to big scale? There's a lot of ideas thrown around about how to solve for that. But overall, it seems like it worked out pretty well. Bitcoin is great digital gold, right? And the real question is, do you have a minimum viable number of competing entities? And do you have freedom of entry and exit? That's really the key. I mean, that's the 0 to 1, is we went from a monopoly to an open competitive market.
Yeah.
Might not be perfect. There's not 1 billion participants, but you don't need 1 billion participants. You need free exit and entry, right? You need a fair system that doesn't preference one player, right? And you can't use violence and coercion to, my mining company is going to be bigger than yours. Like the math doesn't care about violence and coercion, doesn't know it exists. If the math works, then the transaction is valid, the miner gets the reward. That's all that matters, right?
So you worked on Dapps on Ethereum for a while?
Yeah, about 5 years.
Okay.
2013, 2017. Well, spent a lot of that time in Bitcoin, and then a lot of 17 and on into Ethereum. And I sort of tried to contribute to each new layer of the tech stack. So talk about timing, you needed Bitcoin to exist before Ethereum could exist. How did Ethereum come into existence? The ICO was all funded with Bitcoin. No dollars were accepted. You had to have Bitcoin because you could prove it was real value that they could track and see on chain and use, right? And so the same way now, Ethereum was a prerequisite for building everything people are doing now with agents. Right? Without smart contracts, without DeFi, without stablecoins, you couldn't build most of the use cases people are now doing with AI agents, right? So the timing is you needed all of these building blocks. And it's been fun because now we're getting all the way to the top of the tech stack where you can actually build an end user application. We've spent so much the last 15 years building the protocols, the platforms, the infrastructure. We're finally breaking into front end user applications that the actual end consumer can touch and use, and doesn't have to be built by some centralized company. These are all open source protocols and projects.
We've had that for a while with Uniswap.
I wouldn't consider that retail.
Okay.
You look at the numbers, it is still fairly technical people, but they're pushing towards that envelope.
Mm-hmm.
I would say something like Venice AI is one of the first breakout. Within a few months, they got 500,000 users, 100,000 daily actives. Like by Bitcoin terms, that is a huge number of users. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they have their first million users within the next few months, and potentially a lot more than that, because it's a web app.
Mm-hmm.
There's no login. You can use it for free. All the blockchain stuff is obscured in the back end.
I don't even know what Venice AI is.
It's just, ChatGPT.
Yep.
It's like a private version of that.
Okay.
Which encrypts all of your information, stores it locally, and uses all open source models.
And what does it have to do with the blockchain?
Well, it's all built on the blockchain. It uses blockchain to pay for the GPUs that host the open source models. It uses it for its infrastructure.
What does it use to pay?
Tokens.
They have their own token?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Everything ends
Yeah.
up having its own token. Incentive alignment, bootstrapping, and persistence. It's really powerful for that. So this is a project by Eric Voorhees, famous creator of Shapeshift and many early other Bitcoin.
Thorchain?
He's a supporter of that, though not one of the developers.
Okay.
They used Thorchain as the infrastructure to decentralize Shapeshift.
Okay.
So Thorchain is one of the first multi-chain dexes. So you're able to move assets
Yep.
from Bitcoin to Ethereum
Yep.
to whatever chain you wanted across Thorchain. So, but the Shapeshift is much more like the front end for that kind of stuff.
Okay. Well, let's talk about your project.
Sure. I'm a code contributor to Morpheus.
Uh-huh.
I work mostly on the smart contracts. I read the white paper September of 23, shortly after it came out, and then started telling other people about this idea of building smart agents.
Smart agents.
So inevitably, AI agents are going to use smart contracts. They're going to do actions on chain.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's giving an AI a bank account.
Okay.
The AI can't pass KYC.
Okay.
Can't pass AML. It's hard enough for a human to get that. They're going to use crypto.
So this is like an AI assistant where you would ask it to book you flights to New York, whatever.
Sure. Or send money to Bob, or do whatever you want.
Okay.
If it involves some money.
Yep.
Digital intelligence is using digital currency, right? Those are the rails that have been built. They're all programmatic. They work naturally for an AI. But you don't want to necessarily give the AI your wallet or your private key. So Coinbase, for example, has built some great tools for giving granular permissions to agents. I was just at the Coinbase hackathon for agents last week, and they've built something called Agent Kit. So you could authorize your agent for a certain amount of money or a certain amount of time, or to use this one application. It's basically intent-based AI. You express what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
The agent understands, and you push the button on the wallet ultimately to approve the outcome.
Okay.
That's the user flow that got us to mass adoption with the web. If you remember, people were very dismissive of the early internet. They said it's for engineers and technical people and university students. Nobody knows how to type in IP addresses. Nobody knows how to go through these directories. They've never heard of a terminal. But as soon as you had a browser and a search engine, the average person could just tell the machine what they wanted. I want a cool sports
I can't
website.
even imagine the internet without a browser.
And for most people, they couldn't, which is why you had less than 100 million users.
How did you access the internet without a browser?
You typed in the IP address of the website.
Into DOS or what? Into a command line?
Into whatever your connection to the internet was at the time. Like there was a lot of early browsers like Mosaic and all this stuff.
So there was some interface, but it wasn't.
Sure.
It wasn't.
It was not easy to use.
It wasn't
or is it command
a
line
browser
or
as we know
terminal?
it.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
not, it wasn't a GUI. And the real breakthrough wasn't even the browser; it was the search engine. There are all these websites on the internet. How'd you find them?
Yeah.
Google came along and said, hey, we're going to rank all the world's websites. Just tell the machine what you want. I want a sports website. Great. Here's the top 10. And you click on the one you wanted. That unlocked billions of non-technical people getting value out of the web. So we're at that same moment now for Web3. Smart contracts are not easy to use.
Yeah.
Most people have never heard of Lido, or they don't know how Ethereum staking works, or if the USDC they're wanting to send is on Solana or some other chain. They don't care any more than they care about the database their application uses.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And so having a super agent, a personal smart agent that you can express intent to, and then it does all the work of finding the application to connect in, the other smart agent to go call. That's beautiful, right? That gives a easy user interface for Web3. That's what we're seeing. AI will be
I must need a chart.
UI.
I must need a chart.
AI will be the UI,
Uh-huh.
and blockchain's the backend. It's that simple. All the stuff we've been using the last 10 years, all those interfaces are too difficult for the average person. The ultimate user interface is just
For agents or for AI in general?
I'm talking about for anything people want to do online, anything people want to do on chain, anything people want to do in Web3, the interface is going to be AI. You're just going to tell your AI what you want to do. And it's going to help you achieve that.
The same way I tell my Amazon Alexa device.
Sure. Or the
What's the weather?
same way you tell Google where you want to go.
Yeah.
It's the same intent-based flow. You express intent, the machine does the work, you approve the outcome, right?
And when it deals with money, so if I say, hey, Google, write an email to, I better be careful, I got my phone's recording, but write an email to so-and-so.
Yeah.
And I believe, draft an email, and I think it can do that.
Sure.
But if I say, hey, assistant, send $20 to whatever, once it involves money, in other words, that's when cryptocurrency will be needed.
I think so, but it's not just when you're sending money. Virtually anything you want to do takes payments. You want to book an Uber,
Okay.
it takes money.
Any monetary transaction.
Yeah. You want to buy anything, you want to send anything, you want to travel anywhere, and even things online. A lot of times you have a subscription to something where you need to sign up for something. Oh, I need to pay $1 to this service to get access to whatever.
Yeah.
Like the centralized AIs are crippled because they're companies, because they're financial intermediaries. They're not touching any of the finance use cases because they don't want to do AML and KYC, and all that compliance is really expensive. It's 2025 and Google doesn't have a Web3 wallet.
True.
Because they don't want to be a financial intermediary. It would break their business model. Their business model is to give away free software, mine all your data, and sell it to somebody else. And they could do all of that without a bunch of regulations or overhead or compliance, right? And that's the key here, is almost everything you want to do has an economic component. And so your super agent, your smart agent, will be able to take actions for you, not just give you information.
Right.
If you ask a centralized AI like Microsoft or Google to do something, it'll give you a list of things you can do. Here's how you do it. But you still have to take all the actions as opposed to it acting for you. That's the difference. It's going to be 100x more useful to have my AI working on my behalf.
And because it'll necessitate smart contracts.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to give AI your bank account access. That's why cryptocurrency will be also needed.
Yeah. Well, also, you wanted to take that action. Okay, I can send USDC on Base for 1 penny.
Right.
Or even gas free now.
So it almost sounds like AI. The interplay between AI and blockchain is it's an interesting thing to try to map, isn't it?
It's a perfect overlap.
Because the first pairing I heard was blockchain. It will be very important for AI because or in this new world of AI, because blockchain will be able to validate what's real.
Yeah, that's another useful thing.
And so I thought, okay, yeah, that I understand. We can see on chain who owns what, or what is a legitimate Bored Ape or whatever.
In a world of deep fakes,
yes,
on chain will be real.
Yes, and but what you're presenting in this conversation is another pairing.
Is the benefit to blockchain is the better UI. So it goes both ways.
Yeah.
AI also needs censorship-resistant models run anywhere in the world. A lot of countries are trying to control which AI you can even access. If you went to China today, you're not allowed to access GPT.
Sure.
They've blocked, as of like 4 months ago, they've blocked every Chinese person from using ChatGPT.
Sure. Yeah.
And so by default, the open source decentralized model is going to win in those places because it's the one that's available.
You'd be surprised. Well, they have, I'm sure, one available. Well, they do. They have deep,
which is an open source model, which is something that can run anywhere.
But it's also censored.
You can fine tune out a lot of that censorship.
Okay.
Post. As long as it's an open source model, you can see the weights. You can fine tune out a lot of those outcomes. And you've got an American version with Llama, right? Meta has released a series of open source, open weights models called Llama 1, 2, 3, you've probably heard of. So there's a bunch of open source models now that are, and even Twitter, right? Grok is the AI on Twitter. Grok 3 will probably blow all these other models out of the water. Elon is training a huge model right now.
So where does Venus AI fit in?
Venice. So Venice is using all of those open source models. It's presenting you an easy web app to consume them in. So you want to create images, create text, create code. Great. Here are all the best models for that. Sign up for the pro account, you get the powerful models, or use the free version for free. And that's effectively a UI for the average person to access AI that isn't spying on them, that isn't sending any of that information, doesn't record any of that.
Grok does.
Oh, Grok records everything on Twitter.
Yeah. Okay. And the Facebook one?
If you run it locally, you can run it privately. But most people don't want to run their own servers.
Right.
The number of people that want to do that is vanishingly small.
Sure.
So if I can just show up to a website and get those same powerful servers, and Venice does the work of running the servers. Great.
Plus it's built with blockchain built in.
Yep.
So that in theory it would then be better positioned for the future of AI.
Sure. I mean, take for example
with an AI agent potentially.
Well, and it's just cheaper to run all of these systems in distributed context. So if you want to pay Amazon to run a model in the cloud, you're paying 4, 5, 10x what I can pay on a distributed system like Akash. Akash is one of the popular GPU networks that is hosting these AI models and is used by somebody like Venice to say, oh, run Llama 3 for me. Great, I'll pay this guy who's running a GPU in Malaysia or whatever, and he'll do it for 30 cents on the dollar.
Another thing Satoshi could not have foreseen.
Well, it's cool that we're getting all these use cases where the proof of work is useful. And it's not just securing the network, but the proof of work is running an AI model for somebody.
Well, that's a whole other, just connection between those two worlds.
Yep.
But I'm just talking about how blockchain can be used to help secure, and when I say that, I mean make it safe, the AI future.
Yep.
Just like I bet I have a hard time believing Satoshi would have foreseen that Bitcoin mining could help secure a power grid. But who knows? It's just, it's really amazing, like how all these technologies are kind of coming together. We interviewed the second episode on this podcast was with a guy named David Espindola, who wrote. He writes about future, or present, and future technologies, and he took 6 or 7 of them for a book of his, and how they're all going to play together. Right. Whether it's materials or AI or blockchain, or I can't remember the other ones, but
it is the closer we get to the singularity, the more advances in one technology push advances in another.
Yeah.
So look at AI. Google has now open sourced their protein folding AI.
Okay.
Which is basically done what would have taken millions of hours in a lab, simulate the effect of every protein down to a single atom. And so they've run, I think, 30,000 proteins or all known proteins to humankind through their model now and just given them away. And anybody wants to, now use that for drug discovery or creating some new medicine has a tool set that didn't exist a couple of years ago that would have been impossibly expensive to produce. And so those, computational AI advances are now feeding into biology and medicine and drug discovery, genetics. Like, look at genetics. We only in the last few years finally mapped not the genome itself, but the effect of every gene. And we did that by using CRISPR to change a single gene expression and then mapping the effect. And they did that 8 billion times in a lab. And now, okay, here's the book, not only of here are the genes, but here's the expression of every gene. Like, we only got that the last few years. So the acceleration is cumulative and it's compounding and it gets faster and faster. So it's gonna be a fun few years.
Do you have any thoughts on Prospera? And you talked about Google and protein folding. It made me think about some of the experimental medicinal and genetic therapies that they're at least experimenting with or theorizing about here under the, I guess, more flexible regulatory framework here on the ground. Do you have much to say about that? Are you?
Yeah, I've been a long time advocate for longevity. I think it's a very worthwhile area of research, and it's cool to see that the work around economics and these other systems is creating that environment where people can run those experiments, because it's become way too expensive in the US. It's now like $1 billion to discover a drug, and most of that is putting it through the regulatory process and the trials process, right? Not everybody's going to live long enough for whatever therapy they need to get through that crazy regulatory process, right? And so to have free cities, free jurisdictions where you're allowed to innovate and experiment, I think will drive a lot of the outcomes in longevity research, which has come a long way in the last 10, 15 years. So I think that's amazingly, and it's something that universally binds us all together. We all have to deal with aging. We all have to deal with these diseases. Let's put a serious effort into solving them, right? I think people are finally breaking out of this death cult mentality that it's an inevitable and there's no way to treat all the diseases. Like, well, maybe we actually are going to have the tools. That's not going to go away. You can always get hit by a bus. But the idea of seriously tackling age-related diseases should be a no-brainer for everybody. So it's great that that's the use case that's really taken off here.
Yeah, it is. And it makes sense. And okay, well, you know what? I actually didn't. Let's get back to your company, Morpheus, a little bit, because
there's no company.
No company? Well, talk about the protocol. And I think we kind of veered off a little bit.
No,
so
that's all right.
Go ahead and say more about that.
It's a fun conversation. So Morpheus started as a white paper, and it was written by 3 anonymous authors calling themselves Morpheus, Trinity, and Neo.
I wonder where I've heard that.
I know. And I noticed they published the white paper on September 2nd, which is Keanu Reeves' birthday.
Fun.
It's like, there's an Easter egg.
Did you know that?
Well, not at the time,
okay.
But I noticed later on where somebody pointed it out, and it's like,
you have a poster of Neo on your wall?
I don't, but it's a good movie. And it's also a Greek god, so it's sort of in the public domain, so anybody can use the thing. But after the white paper came out, the timing was perfect.
And this was 2021, you said?
23.
Okay.
It's only a couple of years ago. September of 23, the white paper comes out. It's like, because the idea of smart agents had already been sort of circulating, but more on like, I'm going to install it on my local computer. And the heart of the Morpheus proposal was there has to be a network. There has to be an incentive mechanism. There has to be a token. There has to be all the rest of this supporting infrastructure. Otherwise, it's going to be some hobbyists. The number of people that run Bitcoin full nodes is about 10,000 people.
Right.
Anybody can do it.
Yeah, right.
It's just a hassle, and most people don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have to have that network context where people are going to able to access this technology without running the hardware. And that was a brilliant stroke. It also had another innovation around a fair launch. Are you familiar with fair launches?
Yeah, where there's no pre-mine.
There's no pre-mine, and they came up with a really clever mechanism because Ethereum staking had been live, and you had all these people staking their Ethereum. What if you directed the yield, that 3% a year validator reward, instead of taking that yourself, what if you directed that to an open source project? And that became the means of competing to earn the tokens. It was not to give your money to somebody else, not to have a treasury and an ICO and a DAO, but rather just have this fair launch where it was this never-ending process where you could deposit some staked ETH and the yield went to the project into a protocol and liquidity. So it was buying tokens out of the Uniswap. That was a really clever bootstrapping mechanism because it got rid of so much of the complexity.
How did they attract any investment if they were anonymous?
There was no investment. There was no round, there was no token sale. It was entirely this fair launch mechanism.
But who would have even steered their staked proceeds that way?
$500 million showed up to stake Ethereum.
Because the white paper, so the white paper was
inspiring. Well, and the next month in October of 23, the administration put their AI executive order into place. I don't know if you read it at the time. They proposed...
Those are cautionary, right?
Yeah. They proposed to ban open source models.
Okay.
Limit and KYC data centers across the US. It was basically an effort by Google and Microsoft to grandfather in their technologies and prevent anybody else from competing.
Sure.
They're the ones that paid for the executive order. They lobbied really heavily in 23 for safety.
Yeah, right.
That only they could run the magic AI.
No, I think Morpheus lobbied for it.
Yeah, right. Well, it would have, sort of the reaction from the community was, hell no. Hell no. You are not banning math. AI is literally you're trying to ban a database.
We've done this ever since the guy walked around with a T-shirt of the hex
1990s, Phil Zimmerman, the famous
color.
That's what you're referring to.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it was the math for a PGP. He open sourced famously the math for PGP because in the 90s the government said, encryption is a weapon. So they literally in the executive order made the same argument. They called it a dual use technology. Open source AI was going to be a weapon and it would be a felony. It was literally the crypto wars of the 90s all over again. But this time we speed ran them in 2 years instead of 10 years, which was, you had the community open sourcing everything. And we had some sort of unlikely allies emerge. So Zuckerberg, right, was not inside the group that were lobbying. In fact, he wanted to open source all of his AI stuff. So Meta leaked a model. Llama 1 was leaked. Who knows who let it out? And it proved pretty popular. And so they released Llama 2. And eventually they ended up speed running the regulators and training Llama 3 and releasing it 1 day before the regulations from the Commerce Department were supposed to come into effect. Totally by accident.
Yeah. So that's actually I think that's a little reassuring to know that because people love to, or at least many people love to stereotype tech billionaires.
Yeah.
But there's enough of them so that there's a little check and balance in
there.
They're
competing.
Yeah.
They are not monolithic.
Yeah.
They're not all hanging out in the smoky room. They have different interests and incentives. And he wanted to compete with Google and Microsoft. And those guys were trying to literally monopolize all the AI power. And if you think AI is going to do 99% of the thinking in the future, that was going to be really dangerous.
Yeah.
So fortunately, that became a rallying point for Morpheus. So one of the first events that the community put on was Keep AI Open. And we held it the night of OpenAI's developer conference. We had 700 people show up within 24 hours of the announcement. And we had Grimes DJ and Eric Voorhees DJ, and we had the founder of the Effective Acceleration.
700 people arrived in person?
Yeah.
In Austin?
No, in San Francisco.
Okay.
The first decentralized AI summit wasn't until December of 23, and that was in Austin.
Wow. And
then there was one in Denver, and then there was one in San Francisco, and then there was one in Singapore. All over the world, these things started popping up. So there was a lot of urgency because they literally tried to make math illegal. People thought that was ridiculous. We have a lot more resources than we did in the 1990s. The the community rallied and sort of built out the technology.
I remember when a Tennessee, Florida senator or congressman celebrated on Twitter because they made 3D gun printing illegal. And then the very first comment beneath his celebratory tweet was a link to the schematic for a 3D gun.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah.
And so the genie is out of the bottle.
Yeah.
Right? And then you sort of had this wave on the political side, and now the new regime has obliterated the executive order that Biden signed.
Yeah.
So you've got the new regime saying open source AI good, probably largely thanks to Elon and Peter Thiel and folks like that. Silicon Valley got really, let's say, fed up with the last regime because they were basically telling them, you can't fund startups.
Yeah.
We're just going to give all this to the big companies and go away.
Yeah.
They're like, the hell you are.
Yeah.
That's not America. We're going to have competition and innovation. So it's been really great to see sort of that.
So it's well funded. It had that great, it came out of the gate with a lot of investors. And so now your work is to create AI agents that are just integrated with the blockchain technology.
And they're live. You can go on to more.org, MOR.org right now, and download the full node and run those agents locally if you want. You can use Venice.ai and have access to all these open source models. There's about 500,000 people already using Venice in the first few months.
What's the breakthrough here? What can I do with on more.org that is novel?
So if you use the software and you say, hey, I want to do a swap. I want to turn my Ethereum into Bitcoin. Great. It will go grab an agent that does that type of swap, and you just push a button. It's connected to your wallet.
Okay.
It does all the work for you. And it can write a tweet for you, and it can write an essay for you, and it can create an image for you, and anything you would do on ChatGPT, plus all the things they can't do because they don't have a financial rail. Right? You can do on Morpheus or on Venice. You want to use the latest DeepSeek model, the Chinese one that got released?
Yeah.
Great. It's on Venice. The pro account folks have access to the largest open source model in the world. And it is just as good as ChatGPT. You may have heard there was a big security breach the other day and 20 million accounts have been compromised on ChatGPT.
I didn't.
So I hope you weren't using ChatGPT. Now all of your prompts are available on the internet for download.
I'm reading news about how Altman is going everywhere, and all of these large tech companies around the world, they've got a huge investment from SoftBank.
Sure.
They're teaming up with Kakao, with a K, the Korean messaging app.
Sure.
And it seems like he's hustling hard and getting ChatGPT everywhere.
Sure.
Feels weird because there are these competitors that are supposedly better and cheaper and more efficient. And then there was this break, but I don't know, it feels like his hustling is outpacing all the negative aspects.
It feels more desperate to me.
Okay. Yeah, it feels a little...
They're burning $5 billion a year.
Uh-huh.
They're not profitable by any stretch of the imagination. And Elon has a 600 million user base that now all have Grok.
Yeah.
There's 150 million OpenAI users.
Uh-huh.
I think he's realizing, even in some of his recent comments, they're on the wrong side of the open source stuff. I mean, it's highly ironic.
Yeah.
The name OpenAI
I know.
started as open source.
I just have a hard time with the whole integrity of that.
They closed sourced the whole thing and sold out to Microsoft for $30 billion. It's like, come on, guys!
Right.
What are you doing? And so originally they were the darling of the research community because it was open source, because it was aligned with people's ethics. When they closed sourced everything, people were like, all right, well, I guess I'll go build on Llama, I'll go build on some of the open sources. So they've lost a lot of that research community. And then think about the consequences. If you're closed source, you can't publish research about it. So anybody wanting to do the cutting edge stuff can't work anymore at OpenAI. They have to go somewhere where they're allowed to publicly publish about their research and what they're doing and the breakthroughs that they're having. So the energy has moved away from OpenAI, even after sort of they got their big breakthrough and everybody started using ChatGPT, because they, just because you're the player day one, so is AOL.
Yeah.
And AOL built a closed walled garden.
They have a first mover advantage.
At the end of the day, the internet blew AOL out of the water because the open internet was a hell of a lot more interesting and faster growing. And so that's what's happening. So ultimately, OpenAI will either go back to open source or be irrelevant, or only serve large enterprise government clients who want a closed source thing. Those are their options, right?
So more.org, and then people get a different flavor of AI, a more dynamic version of AI that integrates blockchain and financial capabilities.
Sure. And you're going to have this Cambrian explosion. This is what we've seen in the last 3 months of people releasing agents. Yeah. Morpheus is not building any agents. It's a marketplace. It's an aggregator. You want to launch your agent on Virtuals or AI16Z or any of these 100 platforms that have emerged the last 6 months. Great. Register it in the Morpheus decentralized registry. Now your agent is discoverable. Now it's monetizable. Now it can receive payments. Now it can use all the infrastructure. Right? It's sort of like Ethereum doesn't build any smart contracts. The foundation, didn't create Uniswap and Compound and Aave. They created the infrastructure. And so that's why I say what Ethereum did for smart contracts, the Morpheus community is really doing for smart agents.
I see.
It's giving them the payment rail. It's giving them compute. It's the same for compute. Morpheus is not hosting any GPUs. It's just routing people to Akash or Hyperbolic or a BitTensor subnet. Like there's all these great decentralized GPU marketplaces, right? Morpheus is just routing the consumption to the provider.
What's the token for?
You can stake Morpheus in order to get access to compute to any of those providers, or you can use it in order to stake towards a builder. If you want to access an agent, for example, across any of those platforms, you can stake your Morpheus token. And Venice, for example, is the world's most popular Morpheus subnet right now. Like the more than anybody, people are staking towards Venice, and Venice ended up doing a huge airdrop. $100 million of their tokens paid out to their community. Their early testers, their pro users, Morpheus token holders, all of that value flowed to the community. So now other people are looking at that model. That's how I'm going to bootstrap my projects. Because here's a dedicated group of people that all want me to succeed, and I can filter out the bad actors, I can filter out the scammers, I can filter out the civil attacks. If there's some cost to staking towards a project, you have a great filter for like the real people that want to build something and support something. So there's now, I think, 50 subnets already on Morpheus, and it's all these different AI projects and agent builders and infrastructure builders in the space. And because there's no pre-mine, we are all Morpheus. There's no company, there's no DAO, there's no special player, it's chain agnostic, and it works across all the different chains. That's what you want out of infrastructure, for it to be neutral.
Yeah, and broadly applicable.
Yeah. Incredibly neutral is very important.
All right, we have to actually touch on one last thing.
Go for it.
Because I think I'd just be remiss if I did, because this is what we were talking about at lunch.
Okay.
And that was the Bitcoin maximalist versus the, polychain kind of view of things. Like, are there going to be many, or are there going to be one? And I can't tell you how many times I've heard there can only be one money, because it all comes back to Bitcoin. Right? You look at the how tokens do, not compared to the dollar, but compared to Bitcoin, and they all tend toward zero. Not all, of course, but maybe vast majority. But it's really the theory that they strongly posit that you can only have one gold. You can only have one money, one universal digital money. So I even heard one Bitcoin maximalist say, "Look, Ethereum does have a lot of value, right? Clearly, right? Like calling it nonsense is just stupid. But ETH is stupid. Basically, is what he was saying. So I don't know if he thinks that the Ethereum network could integrate Bitcoin as its somehow as its payment, as its currency.
That's something.
I'm not sure what the next step is in marrying his vision to, those two. But we were talking at lunch, and you laid down your case, having worked with Bitcoin and then Ethereum and now other chains, that no, we're moving into a world where there are many different blockchains, just like we have with many different computing languages.
Sure. And the way I would say it is network effects tend to specialize.
Okay.
Just because Microsoft won as the operating system for the personal computer didn't mean they won the network effect for search engines.
Sure.
Google came along, had a better product, got mass adoption.
But they did win for that. There was one search engine.
Yeah. But the network's effects specialized. So I would agree that Bitcoin has won the network effect for digital gold.
Uh-huh.
That does not mean it will win the network effect for smart contracts. Doesn't mean it'll win the network effect for smart agents. All technology are a set of trade-offs.
Mm-hmm.
Speed versus security versus convenience, right? You're making all these choices. Bitcoin's met a set of choices that make perfect sense for being digital gold. 10-minute block times, right? We're going to be very cautious. It's all going to be backwards compatible, which is really what no forks means, is backwards compatibility. You can build something on Bitcoin, it's going to work later on without having to sort of change any fundamental of the ecosystem. And you see the same thing in traditional technology. Microsoft is the Bitcoin. It's the I'm going to be reverse compatible.
Yeah.
You can run your Microsoft XP for 20 years and never update the software. Versus something like Apple, we're just going to make everybody update their software every year, right? That's Ethereum, right? If you want to keep up with the Ethereum network, like this is K optimized versus R optimized, right? This is well known in technology circles. And so to make the case that there aren't specializations of network effects, I don't see it supported anywhere in the world. And so this was literally my original argument in the 2013 Dapps paper, is that network effects specialize. That's okay. They'll build different use cases and have different use cases that they'll serve. And that increases total freedom. Like, what's the real goal? Is it number go up, or is it increasing human prosperity? And so I had that argument a lot in 2013 and 2014. Very few people argue with me anymore. I think $1 trillion of decentralized applications. Later, I feel fairly well validated that other networks can exist and have value over time. And so, what I said to you at lunch was, know what you're doing. Know what you're participating in. And what I mean by that is the Bitcoin maximalists are right in that if you want a savings mechanism, you shouldn't be at the altcoin casino. You shouldn't be swapping meme coins. That's not a savings mechanism. That's gambling. And so if you want to be a degen and gamble, know that's what you're doing, right? There's nothing wrong with that. People ask me when meme coins are going away. I ask them when gambling and gaming is going away. Never, right? So, but know that that's what you're participating. A lot of times what happens is people conflate Bitcoin with these other projects and they get wrecked. And then they decide, I'm done with the casino, forget about it, it's all a scam. And they just move their value into Bitcoin. That's fine. That's a reasonable reaction. Or I would say Ethereum is in the middle. It's an investment platform. People are using the smart contracts for DeFi and for yield and for stablecoin payments, and all of those use cases are valid, but they still have risk. You better be a sophisticated investor. You better be a VC. You better know that it's investment and be thinking about it in an investment context, not a savings account. So again, people get wrecked. That took too much risk in a particular investment. They say, the hell with this. I don't understand this. I don't know what this is. They put money into Bitcoin. So this is often called the trash compactor. So every cycle, the trash compactor, the bad projects get destroyed and the value flows to the best projects. Though it's not fair to say nothing's outperforming Bitcoin. Ethereum,
you're going to remember that has Solana, obviously.
Solana. And so, but it's fair to point out that there are a small set of winners by each large network effect, right? And that's important to understand. These are very much winner-take-all network effects within their specialization, right? And so if you remember, everybody who claimed they were going to be an Ethereum killer nobody's killed Ethereum because 95% of the smart contracts, everybody learns Solidity.
Yeah.
They're not going to rewrite all of 10 years of code.
So the idea of these networks remaining, whether it's Solana, Ethereum, whatever, but using Bitcoin as their currency, that is not a realistic future.
No. Why would they use a unit of account other than their own? So what does everybody use on Ethereum?
Because
they use ETH.
Well, they always say it's not money. ETH is not money, they say. Bitcoin is money.
I wouldn't say Bitcoin is money. I would say Bitcoin is digital gold.
Okay.
And there's an important distinction there.
Yeah.
I would say that Ethereum is money for smart contracts. The way Morpheus is becoming money for smart agents, right? The way Solana has become money for, the casino, the stock market of people trading and speculating on things.
If ETH and Solana are only useful for their own networks, while Bitcoin is useful for buying anything around the world, and people storing it like digital gold, that it seems to me that unless those networks grow a lot, Solana and Ethereum, that all their speculative value would cause the tokens to drop in value quite a bit. Because the only use case would be to keep their networks alive, to keep their networks going, which is significant because their networks involve a lot of people. Yeah,
only $30 trillion went across the Ethereum rails last year. That might be volumes equal to that of Visa.
But do you think some of the...
I think 99% of the world's economy will be running on blockchains in the next 10 to 15 years. Right? We're getting further up the S-curve. Right?
Okay.
500 million people now have a Web3 wallet. By the end of this year, it might be the first.
I'm just trying to conceive of how ETH is a useful
and
instrument. And it sounds like it's contained within Ethereum, whereas Bitcoin can be useful because I can buy a cheese sandwich for Bitcoin here on Prospera.
Sure.
And you can't do that with ETH.
I did this afternoon.
Okay.
I swapped some ETH into some Solana, and I turned some Solana into ICC, and I bought my lunch. That's literally how I bought lunch.
Well, that's a whole other conversation.
Bitcoin would have been very expensive and slow to for that particular use case.
Well, they're using Lightning, or they will. But.
Sure, one day. I've been waiting 8 years. I'm
sure.
So
without getting into too much, it sounds like the long and short of it is you see the different cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, etc., maybe as the different social media. We have a YouTube, we have a Twitter or X, we have a Facebook, we have an Instagram.
They're different network effects.
Okay.
And they've made different trade-offs, and that's okay.
Yeah.
My goal is maximum human freedom. I'm a freedom maximalist.
Yeah.
And I will use whatever tool makes the most sense for that. But it's a fair point that for most people, if they just want a savings mechanism, just buy Bitcoin.
Yeah.
That's literally the letter that I wrote to my family in 2012 after discovering Bitcoin was to say, this is the first honest savings account we've had in our lives. It's not going to be inflated by politicians. It's not controlled by some third party. If it did nothing more in 2012 than maintain its purchasing power, it would have been better than holding dollars.
Right.
And so I believe in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And I use Ethereum.
Yeah.
And I use Solana today.
Yeah. And
that's okay, right? Yeah. Most mature engineers and founders and entrepreneurs ought to pick a tool based on its utility. Right? And Bitcoin is great at what it does.
Yeah.
Ethereum is great for smart contracts. And that's okay. Right? So again, I haven't had this debate in a long time because I feel $1 trillion later, the conversation's kind of over. But I know new people that
it's not.
Read the marketing and just
every time Elon posts about crypto or Donald Trump posts about crypto, they say Bitcoin only in the comments.
Sure.
A lot of Bitcoin maximalists.
And they're Ethereum maximalists. And they're Solana maxis. And a tribe tends to, over time, sort of get into this religious fervor. But I understand why they're doing it, but it has much more to do with signaling and marketing and promotion of their coin going up than it has to do with reality. And I'm here to build things in reality, and I'm going to use the best thing for that. So, that was the hilarious thing about the meme coin by Trump. What did he do? He sold the meme coin. He doesn't want to hold value in Trump coin. What did he sell it for? He sold it for Ethereum and Bitcoin, the Bitcoin as wrapped Bitcoin on Ethereum.
That also made Bitcoin maximalists mad. I noticed
I'm sure it did. But That's the utility. That's a perfect example of the casino, and the money that flowed out of the casino turned into store of value in Bitcoin and Ethereum, and all the smart contracts are on Ethereum. So it was, done via Ethereum.
So
but the funny thing to me is the maximalists should love this. They should love it. What happens to those wrapped Bitcoin that sit there?
Yeah, they go off.
It's off supply.
Yeah.
It's out of circulation. It's been locked up effectively forever. It's making Bitcoin more scarce. They don't seem to understand Ethereum has added enormous value to Bitcoin.
Yeah, right.
Again, what did they raise capital in? Bitcoin. It was from Bitcoiners. All the Ethereum people were Bitcoiners, right? And it's the same today. Solana is not subtracting value from Ethereum. Again, somebody issues a meme coin over there. They end up using a smart contract over here. The cumulative value is increasing on blockchains in general. It's like saying that you ran a sports website and you're very upset the forestry company built a website also.
I see.
Because they're competing for website visitors.
Yeah.
Like, not really, dude. Like, you're running the sports website. The guy that went to the forestry website doesn't care about
Sure. There's some competition, but it's largely the pie's growing.
The internet growing and having lots of websites was way more important than like my particular website.
Right.
Is competing with that. So like mostly it's imaginary and entertaining, as long as you know it's entertainment value and none of these people are serious. Because I know them all in person.
And now it's to the point where AI is here.
Yeah.
And so the cumulative effect is both including and being accelerated by this new tech, including more.org.
Sure, absolutely. I think AI is going to give us this beautiful user interface for Web3, for crypto, for Bitcoin, for Ethereum, for everything, because you can just talk to the machine, tell it what you want to do, and you get the outcome. Like that's what happened in the early days of the web. There was that search engine moment that brought it mainstream. That's how we get to 1 billion users.
Gosh, thanks so much for all of your time and insight. Appreciate it so much.
Yeah,
all right.
Absolutely, man.
Thanks.
Good to be here.